There's a question I've gotten a lot over the years, and it goes something like, how can I reconcile being in the present in the way that we are in this practice with having goals or with thinking about my future? I feel like for years this was the question that would come up over and over again, both from people who were steeped in the practice and people who were new to it, and just seeing this, or just sensing that there was a paradox here for the first time. But then I feel like there's been a shift in the last few years away from this question and into a question that feels like a cousin. And that question is something like, how do I resolve the openness and the spaciousness of Zazen, of what we're doing, with having a passion for something? And often this comes in the context of some sort of activism. You know, how do I stand up for what's right and muster the passion that I need to stand up for what's right? How do I march? How do I make that speech? How do I find that resolve and do this other thing? How do these things coexist? I've heard people recently speak about how, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, it can even feel, if you're really fighting for something, it can feel as if you have to bring that with you into Zazen. Maybe you can leave everything else. Maybe everything else can be put just outside the door, but that's one thing you can't let go of. And so you kind of sneak it in your pocket. Make sure it's always with you. And so I've been thinking about this question a lot for a while, and also noticing how different corners of the tradition seem to speak to this idea of passion differently. You know, when I was in the monastery, there were rules about what we could put in the food, and there were 5 pungent foods we weren't allowed to use, and now I don't remember the list except for garlic. Garlic was one, and the reason was that the tradition upheld the idea that garlic and these other 4 arouse the passions. And not just sexually, though that's always kind of there when people talk about this, but that they bring up this kind of heat that you feel. The heat that you feel when you're wound up. The heat that you feel if you're at a concert and everybody is saying, you know, chanting for an encore, and now you're chanting for it, and you're riding this wave. That's what garlic does. And that we have to watch out for that. We have to watch out for that feeling of not just getting swept away, but kind of wanting to. Maybe in the way that we do when we fall in love, or we put some blinders on, because it feels better to put blinders on. It's exciting to fall all the way in. So there's that side of the tradition, that very traditional kind of, I think, Theravada-based vision where we want to tamp that down. And then there's this other language that we hear, particularly in Zen sometimes, about bringing passion to the practice itself. And we hear this a lot around koans, that there's supposed to be a red-hot iron ball in your stomach. You're supposed to be consumed by it. You're supposed to consume it. or that you should practice as if there's a fire on your head, with that urgency and that singular purpose. Garlic is great for that kind of practice, right? Supposedly. That's one side of Zen. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the other side and how maybe we can make sense of this. So on one hand we have this idea that you're supposed to burn with the practice. And then we have in Keizan's instructions for Zazen what is one of my favorite lines in the whole Zen tradition, if not my absolute favorite, which is that after he gets through all his instructions and he lays out posture and breathing and all this stuff, after pages and pages, at the very end he says, "Be like cold ash. Be like a withered tree." It's so good. What is cold ash? What is a withered tree? What are they in relationship to things that we care about? Well, they are not things that burnt out. They are not things that gave up. They are not things that lost their passion. They're the other side of passion. They're the other side of that fire. Cold ash is something that got burnt all the way through, but is not burning anymore. It's on the other side. A withered tree lived completely. But is no longer grasping at something. Right? It's no longer reaching up to the sun with that one last leaf. It's done. And we understand these two lines in terms of Zazen specifically, right? Because they're such perfect illustrations of the idea that we do this without a seeking mind, that we aren't trying to become something, right? That we are coming to this practice at the fruition point, not at the beginning of the path. We sit as Buddha, not as Buddhas to be. But these same images work, I think, in interesting ways in relationship to other things. What does it look like to have spent your life caring deeply about something? Giving yourself over to that thing. And now, to be on the other side, again, not in a place of not caring, but in a place of no longer being caught up. In a place of no longer grasping. It's not so mystical. It's a lot of what I think we associate with old age. It's something we associate with a certain kind of maturity. And as we talk about a lot, this practice, if anything, is an acceleration of a certain kind of maturity. How do we get there? How do we get from where we are now, as people who not only deeply care about something, but are interested in this idea of moving beyond the romance of it, or who maybe are not sure if what we're saying to ourselves is true, that I do have to feel this heat all the time, that this is something I can't let go of, that I have to hold that red hot iron ball. What if we're at least open to the question of whether there's more? It's hard. Just as it is with Zazen, it's hard. Because our first instinct is to fabricate it, to imitate it, to say, this is what it would look like if I had done this my whole life, and now I had the big view. I had let go a little bit. But there are little pointers. Dogen talks about, in his instructions for the cook, he talks about the 3 minds of Zen. The 3 minds of the cook. Their joyful mind, big mind, and parental mind, let's say. The mind of an elder. All 3 of these minds point to what it is to be cold ash. They all point to what it is to be a withered tree. But maybe not in such stark terms. Big mind is exactly what it sounds like. It is that spaciousness. It's the big picture. It's the ability to step back a little bit, even when everything is pulling you forward. This applies to everything. Any time that the circumstances seem to demand of you a narrower view, because it's so urgent, or because it's so important, because it's so pressing, that the only way to address it is to make your lens like this. That's a delusion. It's a powerful delusion. But it's a delusion. The big mind knows that. And in that moment of wanting to step forward and get really, really small, it allows you to step back and see what's happening and why. The parental mind, or the mind of an elder, is also just what it sounds like. It's taking care. It's taking care of others. It's seeing yourself as being in that role, regardless of who you're dealing with. So that when someone is cold, you put a blanket on them. And when someone is thirsty, you offer them a glass of water. If you're the cook, you cook a healthy meal. Because that's what people need. And joyful mind, it doesn't have to be forced. It's connected to the other two. It takes pleasure in that service. And it has the advantages of that big view. But I'd add, it's also maybe a little bit playful. It can smile at what's going on. You know, people come to me sometimes and they'll tell me, for example, that they've met the person who is the one. They just met this person, but this person is the one. And they're glowing when they say this. It's really beautiful. And they're making plans, and they're discarding older plans, and they're forming this story about what's going to happen next. And when I hear this, I'm so genuinely happy for them. And I can smile for another reason as well, which is that I see the delusion, and I know the delusion is okay. If you had grandparents you were close to, your grandparents were the same. They heard you talk about the career you were going to have and the path you were going to take. And then 6 months later, they heard you talk about now the career you were going to have and the path you were going to take. And maybe 6 months later, they heard another one. And they could say, oh, really? Oh, that's great. That's great. Not because they think you're stupid. Because they love you. And they see through what's happening at the same time. Sometimes people come to me and they're on fire about Zen. I want to dedicate everything to this practice. I don't want to think about anything else. This is the most important thing. It's the same. It's beautiful. And there's more. There's something on the other side of that passion. There's something on the other side of being worked up. There's something on the other side of feeling that you have to care so much that you can't blink for fear that it will leave your view. So again, how do we get to that other side? Not like that. But by noticing, I think, the elements involved. So we can spend some time noticing what it is to have a big mind. We can spend some time noticing that parental mind. We can spend some time noticing that joyful mind, that playful mind. Let them interact. See what happens. I love this question, by the way. This question of how to resolve these things. It's saying, I see two things that I want to give myself to. I see two things that I want to commit to. I want these things to work. But it also comes from a bit of an either-or. If I care so much about this, probably this will suffer. If I care so much about this, probably this will suffer. It's natural that we think that way. It's not as simple as that's not true. But it's also only a very small part of what is true. And so whether we're sitting in this posture, or we're marching, or we're forging a new life, we can be completely sincere. We can be completely committed. We can be completely authentic to those practices and to those commitments, and at the same time, we can be like a cold ash. We can be like a withered tree, completely spent, full already with the experience that we're just now embarking on. It's a strange thing this tradition asks of us, but there it is. I'll stop there.